Welcome to Asia-Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia-Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. I've still been going through material from last week's Indo-Pacific conference in Sydney, and that was the one I couldn't attend, and I suspect I'll be doing so for quite some time because there were a lot of briefings and a lot of transcripts to read. And one that jumped out at me was, in fact, the opening remarks of Defence Minister Richard Marles, and I'm going to quote directly from it. This is our Defence Minister saying to the assembled multitudes, "On the Navy side of the House, last count, there are 58 countries that are represented here with 35 chiefs of Navy, and I know that Admiral Hammond has literally been salivating at the prospect of the Sea Power Conference this year. To have so many chiefs of Navy congregating in one spot is a kind of version of Navy Disneyland." Okay, that's it. Now, if our Chief of Navy, Vice Admiral Mark Hammond, was literally salivating, then I suspect our national security problems are far more serious than even I believed. But that was a slip of tongue. But the other one, to talk about this as a naval Disneyland, look, I've got a sense of humour, but when it comes to these sorts of things, I'm pointing this out not to make fun of Mr. Marles, but because it goes to something deeper, and that is the trivialisation of defence and the lack of intelligent discussion about numerous issues, a situation which seems to be getting worse, not better, for example, about why we are acquiring nuclear-powered submarines. Because, as I mentioned last week, the government and the opposition blocked what looked like a perfectly reasonable Senate inquiry that had been proposed by the Australian Greens. And to add to that, and as I and others have pointed out, even in the United States, if you look at one of their top think tanks, government-funded service, the Congressional Research Service, it has pointed out that Australia, in making the decision to go ahead with the acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines, has never examined any of the alternatives. If we look at this decision in strategic terms and say, okay, well, the number one task is to deter a conflict with China, let's sit down and figure out the best way of doing that. Nuclear-powered submarines might be part of the mix, but they might not if you looked at all of the other things that would add to Australia's deterrence capability: satellite surveillance systems, long-range missiles, long-range bombers, conventional submarines, greater reliance on autonomy. None of that was done. Anyway, that's a repeat theme. Now, getting back to Indo-Pacific and this issue of trivialisation, it's also flown through to C-3000, which I repeatedly referred to as a goat rodeo, the non-competition for the selection of the Megami frigate from Japan, because there's been no serious discussion other than, in the very specialised publications like ours, about the merits of getting ships with no change. That's never been really discussed, nor has the 2029 delivery date. What's magical about that? And one of the interviews that I've been going through was with Rear Admiral Stephen Hughes, the head of Navy capability, talking about the Megami. And I'm going to say at the outset, and as I've said before, the Megami is an excellent ship. The upgraded Megami in particular, the version that Australia is getting, it's a powerful ship, and the things that impress me the most are its stealth characteristics and also a very high level of crew automation. These are very, very important features, and I have no problem at all with the selection of the Megami for those reasons and others. But it wasn't a fair fight, as I've said before and as I've put in writing, with Defence evaluating the rival TKMS offer. They only evaluated the reference ship, which TKMS has delivered to Egypt, rather than the Australianised ship. And to do that, to have a competition between the Japanese Megami and an Egyptian frigate, it's totally ludicrous. It's a sham competition that should have been stopped at that point. But to make this even worse, and by the way, I'm doing this in bits and pieces. I'm putting together a pretty detailed article, which I'm hoping to get out before Christmas. But another feature in all of this is that Defence didn't even tell ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems what the situation was. So the company continued to believe that Defence were evaluating their very Australianised offer with Saab's 9LV combat system and a full suite of US weapons, and it has come as such a profound shock and disappointment to me to discover that that was not the case. As I say, there's a lot more to come in all of that. And one of the things, again, that I have touched on, Defence outrageously added to the cost of the TKMS bid the need to buy a whole lot of European missiles that they claimed they would need to buy with the Egyptian ship. Well, I notice that the Megami, and this is courtesy of Rear Admiral Hughes, will come with a self-defense system known as CRAM. It's an excellent short-range missile-based defensive system, a combined US-German development, and it's one I thought the RAN should have acquired a couple of decades ago. But what I'm referring to is it's the principle of the thing. You know, you've got one bidder marked down because their ship had to come with different missiles. On the other hand, Megami comes with different missiles, but no problem there. Underlying all of this, of course, is this absurd amount of secrecy. Cabinet documentation has a 30-year convention. Papers get released every year from 30 years previously, and some journalists get very excited about that. The basis for that being, well, Cabinet would be impaired in its decision-making processes if very sensitive matters saw the light of day soon after decisions were taken. I can sort of follow the logic of that. So it's been decided that 30 years feels about right for really, really sensitive stuff. Now, get this. The C3000 evaluation, because of the rules of Defence and this government, will remain secret forever. Stuff will never see the light of day, even though a decision in favour of Japan and the Megami was taken 6 months ago. All of the other bidders, even those who didn't make the shortlist, are banned for life from revealing any information at all about what they proposed. Now, you see, I thought that this government might have learned its lesson from the destruction of the entire Taipan helicopter fleet, which still stands out for me as the most outrageous set of actions I've seen Defence and a government take. But no, this government continues to accept at face value whatever utter nonsense the department chooses to dish up. Now, before entirely leaving the topic of the naval surface fleet, a kind listener, a kind reader, was good enough to send me pictures of the first Bulgarian corvette. This is the one based on the Arafura design by the company Lursen, who have now sold their business to ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems. The Bulgarian corvette, 90 metres, is a bit longer than an Arafura. It's heavily armed, vertical launch missile system, 76mm main gun, anti-submarine warfare torpedoes, close-in weapons system. The version of this that Lursen proposed for Australia was even slightly larger, about 2,200 tonnes. If it had been selected, it would be under construction at Henderson in Fremantle right now, with the first ship being delivered in 2026, next year with 16 vertical launch missile cells, blah, blah, blah. It would have plugged the gap in Navy's surface ship capability until the general purpose frigates came online. There would have been no need for the first 3 general purpose frigates to have been built overseas. Construction could have started in Australia when the end of construction of the corvettes neared. Didn't happen. I actually went back and had a look again. I had the chance. I think the only time Richard Marles was ever asked a question about this was by me in Perth last year, and I asked why that option had been ignored, and he simply said, well, we've decided to do something different. Again, more trivialisation. Well, why have you decided to do something different? What's wrong with the option of an Australian build of heavily armed corvettes? Okay, now, international stuff which has caught my eye and which is causing me a great deal of concern regarding the United States. Britain has now stopped sharing some intelligence information. This relates to the United States conducting extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, blowing up suspected drug-carrying boats with no evidence. So the Brits, who have a substantial presence in the Caribbean, they've cut off that intelligence. They've basically decided they don't like what the United States is doing, and they're not going to be part of murder on the high seas. But Australia and Britain until now, and many European countries, are pretending everything is normal, when it definitely is not. And I'll just mention, look, there are many things that could be said about US politics that are concerning me. The place is being roiled at the moment because of the Epstein files. That President Donald Trump is doing just about everything in his power to make sure no further information about his role in all of this gets out. It looks like a mess. But the other feature is that the US president is now openly being bribed. I mentioned before the 747 from Qatar that was handed over as a gift, that US taxpayers are spending about $1 billion refurbishing. So, and that gets donated to his presidential library, but that means that he can use it when his career finishes in politics, whenever that might be. I don't think he's going anytime soon. But I'll just mention, it's a small one, but for me is just so emblematic of what is going on. And I don't know if this has received any coverage in Australia, but he's now also been bribed by the Swiss. Now, Switzerland, for reasons that are unclear, was hit with 35% tariffs on Liberation Day. No one could really figure out what that was about. But the Swiss recently met with Trump and gave him, I'm not making this up, a 1 kilogram gold bar that's worth about 200,000 Australian dollars that was engraved with the numbers 45 and 47 on it, because Trump is the 45th and now the 47th President of the United States. So a lot of flattery. He gets handed gold bar, and as a consequence, tariffs have been dropped on Switzerland from 35% to 15%. Australian politicians and the media seem to be in a state of constant denial that anything untoward is going on in the US. As well as general lack of coverage in newspapers and not much on TV, we once again had the example on the weekend of insiders. People know I'm, addicted to that. I think we Canberra Bubble people watch it religiously, and an interview with Penny Wong. So I was hoping, of course, for a focus on relations with the US. I mean, in passing, the foreign minister did say that the US was our most important security partner, so let's have a discussion about how reliable that partner now is. Instead, it was questions about Vanuatu, whether we're going to have a security treaty with Vanuatu, then Indonesia, And I grant you that is important, and it's a work in progress. And the third area was the totally insignificant fact of Trump caving on tariffs on imported food products because US domestic prices are going up, because it's US consumers who are paying the tariffs, and Australian beef happens to be among those. Nothing at all on whether the US is still a reliable ally, and I think that needs to be front and centre in all discussions relating to Australia's national security. It's just such a fundamental concern. And I wonder when some sort of break will finally be forced on the government, and especially US cheerleaders, such as Richard Marles, in number one spot by far, and also on the bureaucracy. Defence and DFAT are just behaving. Everything is perfectly normal. We just have to behave as if nothing at all has changed, and things will continue on as they have. Now, keep in mind, President Trump has not appointed an ambassador to Australia, and please also keep in mind the likelihood that the regular OSMIN talks, that's the high-level talks between Australia and the US, might not happen. Been a fixture since 1984 from memory. Every second year it's in Australia. This year it's Australia's turn. We don't have long to go before the end of the year, and there is no chance of it happening in Canberra. There's a suggestion that sometime before Christmas people might make some sort of panic dash to Washington, another knee-bending exercise, I suppose. So again, the relationship doesn't seem to be in a particularly good state as far as I can tell. And also keep in mind, the United States now cozying up to China. And a final thought on the Columbia-class ballistic missile firing submarine. Slow down. These SSBNs are the replacement for the Ohio class. And here I'll read comments from US Representative Joe Courtney, who I've referred to on a few occasions, because he is one of the greatest enthusiasts for AUKUS, and not coincidentally, whose electorate is home to General Dynamics Electric Boat, the builder of Virginia-class submarines and Columbia-class submarines, who are in turn his largest campaign donors. And he said just a couple of days ago, he'd spoken about healthcare cutbacks, and then adds, additionally, this is the direct quote, additionally, despite requests from the White House and the Navy, this funding deal excludes any additional funding for the Columbia-class submarine program to address shortfalls. We are at a critical time for submarine construction. With submarine yard tonnage near all-time highs, our industrial base is working to construct the new Columbia-class submarines while also ramping up delivery of the Virginia-class submarines. The exclusion of a Columbia program plus up from this funding bill against the Navy's wishes will disrupt the nation's top national security priority and will undoubtedly slow shipbuilding momentum. End of quote. Can we please have a sensible discussion about this in Australia? Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye for now, and see you next time.
That's today's Asia-Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.